There is no such thing as a free lunch. And there is no such thing as solutions, but only trade-offs. These are two absolute truths that women who have entirely swallowed the complete and utter stupidity of sexual liberations have failed to learn. And now the bill for that ignorance is on the table, and they will have to pay for it. The party time is over for quite a lot of women, and they don't like it. Let's explore. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Freedom Alternative. On January 7, the Daily Mail published the first article in what they say is a two-part series, and the first part is titled, quote, "Are reluctant men to blame for so many women being childless? Record numbers are never becoming mothers, and not by choice." Now, I won't read the entire article, but let me read you this little gem right from the beginning of the article, quote, "Sadly, it seems that the majority of these childless women desperately wanted a family. Jody Day, founder of Gateway Women, a support network for childless women, says that her research shows that 10% of such women are childless due to infertility and 10% have chosen to be child-free. But that leaves some 80% of women without children who have simply ended up in this situation. Melanie Whitehouse is certainly one of these women, and she is clear about the cause of her childlessness: men. Or rather, the lack of men who were willing to settle down and start a family with her. The heartbreaking realization that she was never going to have a baby struck late in her 50s while at a reunion lunch with her first boyfriend, whom she had dumped on a whim. I hadn't grieved for the children who might have been until then. I realized with painful clarity what I had lost," she says. "Tom had been happily married for 25 years and had 3 kids, while I had nobody." So, she dumped her first boyfriend on a whim. She did that. Turns out that the dude was more than willing to settle down and start a family, even with her. But she chose not to. But somehow, men in general are at fault. Now, I could go on into a long argument on toxic legal climate and how and why men are avoiding women, and then explain a thing or two about personal responsibility, yada 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 yada. But I won't. I expect this audience to be smart enough to know these things already. Heck, it's now a mainstream topic, so, just Google MGTOW, Sexodus, and grass-eating men, and, start reading. There's tens of thousands of articles, videos, and even a few books out there about this topic, so I'm not going to delve into that. Also, the women this article gives examples of were in their heyday 30 years ago, so, some of the Sexodus/MGTOW narrative doesn't exactly apply, since the Sexodus as a mass phenomenon is slightly newer, although the concept has been in existence for hundreds of years. So let's approach the topic from a more pragmatic standpoint and with fewer sexual politics in it, starting from the research quoted in the first paragraph, which claims that 10% of childless women are infertile, 10% chose to be childless, and that, quote, leaves some 80% of women without children who have simply ended up in this situation. And also, notice the language, they simply ended up in this situation. Just like you accidentally end up in a fight in the bus, or you simply end up having brain cancer due to some bizarre genetic abnormality that was way beyond your control. The reality, though, is that those 80% did not simply end up in this situation through no fault of their own. Quite the opposite. Virtually all of them did, in fact, choose this, but for various reasons they refuse to admit it. Or maybe they are indeed too stupid to even figure out when they chose this. A couple of truths first. Women on average can bear children between the ages of 13 and 45. Now that's in theory. In practice, the window is between the ages of rather 14 or 15 till the age of 29, 30 tops. After that, the chances of bearing a healthy child drop faster than a heavy hammer thrown into the ocean. Of course, there is the occasional 50-year-old new mother and the occasional 9-year-old mother, but as a rule, things stay, as I say they do. Men, on the other hand, on average, can conceive between the ages of 12 or 13 till the end of their lifetime. Again, that's in theory. In practice, the window is between rather 14 or 15 till somewhere around 65. Yeah, sure, there have been cases of 96-year-old new fathers, but as a rule, the sperm count drops significantly after 65, and successfully impregnating a woman at 70 is not a guarantee at all. Now, the article claims that it is unfair that men don't have to decide then and have the advantage of time. Well, it may be unfair, but it is also unfair that women can have sex whenever they want, even if they're very ugly and fat. There will always be someone willing to do it. It's biology, and yes, biology is sexist, because that's how things work in sexually dimorphic species. Now, you can complain about it or just take it as a given and build your life and your worldview around it and not through it. You see, we as humans can bend biology somewhat. The fact that we have a life expectancy of 80, for instance, is not due to nature, but it's due to capitalism and human ingenuity around biology. But we cannot remove biology. Any treatment, any action meant to bend biology must first and foremost take biology as it is into account before even considering any implementation. And if this condition is not met, well, dire consequences emerge. For instance, let's say I develop a treatment for brain cancer, but in order to implement it, the heart may be overworked, which usually results in the death of the patient. Yeah, sure, it cures the cancer, but it also cures life. Now, sane people would understand that this is a very, very bad trade-off, and as such, my treatment is discarded even though it does deliver the promised good, namely to cure brain cancer. Now, you may say that the analogy is imperfect, and it is, that's why it's an analogy, but it is imperfect in the opposite sense than usual, namely that it is too kind. Because you see, the social treatment to alleged female oppression delivered by the sexual liberation claptrap did not even deliver the promised good, even under harsh conditions. Women have been promised that they can have it all, a completely unreasonable and impossible to fulfill promise, but a promise which large swaths of women have indeed internalized and organized their lives in accordance to it. And that's not the fault of men. In fact, men tried in vain for 100 years to warn that this treatment will make everyone worse off. But women didn't listen and used their power to manipulate the men in power to pass whatever they wanted in order to deliver the paradise now and allow the social treatment provided by the sexual liberation to work. Now, the generation of women born in late 60s, both in Western Europe and Eastern Europe, as well as North America and several other places, was the first to be the beneficiary of this experiment. And the results are in. Women have progressively become less and less happy, whilst men's happiness has mildly declined or has rather stayed flat. It depends on which studies you look. And it turns out that the diminishing family is one of the big factors that contributed to women's dwindling happiness, much to the surprise of exactly nobody in the sane sector of the society. Because you see, as much as egalitarians would try to convince you otherwise, most people, men and women, are more than happy to be unequal and have unequal power structures within their marriages. Even worse for the egalitarian narrative, most people are very happy with what is now called a traditionalist household, where men earn most or all of the income and women are homemakers. A 2013 study revealed that 62% of British working women over the age of 25 actually wanted to be a housewife. 74% of them identified other women as the main pressure factor for them not pursuing their wish. And 78% of them said that they would not mind at all to be financially dependent on their husband. I'm sorry, ladies, giving in to the catfights and the pressure from other women is not the fault of men. It's yours. A 2006 study, also in Britain, on a similar demographic revealed that 90% of working women would indeed quit their jobs today if they could become housewives. The 2006 study also revealed that almost 2/3 of childless working women have as a main concern, you guessed it, their fertility. At that time, 10 years ago, the psychologists warned that there is a pending fertility crisis generated exactly by the women who've put their careers ahead of having children and caring for their families. Well, we are 10 years down the line and the crisis has started to show its head. And it will only get a lot worse from now on. Not everywhere, of course. For instance, France has a close to healthy fertility rate and still quite a decent family structure overall thanks to its Catholic majority, which is a bit surprising given that modern-day collectivism is, after all, a French invention. Albania isn't in a bad shape either, but most of Europe is feeling it, especially Western Europe. Now, for a while, between 1990 and 2005, Eastern Europe was in the same boat, but since then, Eastern Europe's fertility rate started to grow again, even during economic depression, which suggests that the issue is much less tied with economics as many would suggest. Anyway, I'll treat these details in a future episode about demographics, but let's get back to the topic. There is now a fertility crisis that has been predicted a decade ago, and it is, at least in part, connected to the policies of sexual liberation. You see, women are the majority of voters, and they voted and convinced some men to vote as well for a bigger state and less sanity, much to the dismay of the then tiny minority of sane men and women. And I say tiny minority because actions speak louder than words. Women may talk big about being feminine and whatnot as much as they please, but at the end of the day, they have 1.5 children. Mathematics doesn't lie. A significant chunk of women de facto swallowed the absolute lie of sexual liberation. Now, is this me making the case for a compulsory traditionalist society? Nope. But this is me making the case to make being a housewife acceptable again. And this is me making the case to accept that choices do have consequences, and they are not the fault of men in general, but they're the fault of the individual who makes those choices. You want to be an independent career woman? Knock yourself out. But then don't come around and whine that men don't want you, or that it is men's fault that you dumped on a whim a perfectly fine gentleman eager to settle with you because your petty, temporary feelings and your precious little career was more important. This is also me making the case that girls should no longer be spoon-fed the lies of the sexual liberation claptrap, but rather a more realistic set of expectations. No, cupcake, you are not equal with a man. In some respects, you are better than the average man, but in other respects, you are worse, a lot worse than the average man. And no, you cannot do anything men can do, and in high heels, you just cannot, and you won't. Deal with it. Oh, and by the way, you have 15 years to decide whether you want children or not. Choose carefully and assume responsibility for your choice. This is the kind of discourse that every 15-year-old girl should get from her parents. But they seldom do get this. Instead, they get #WasteHisTime2016, where adult women teach young girls on how to exploit boys and men just for shits and giggles. That's not empowering, that's further reassurance that the crisis will continue for another decade and its effects will linger for at least 2 more decades. Actually, that's enough for these man-hating, house-full-of-cats bitches to actually feel the effect of their stupidity. That is, if they're smart enough to at least figure that one out, namely diminishing state pensions, crappier elderly care, and societal ignorance. So, to sum up, the culture needs to start embracing the basic facts of life. Choices have consequences even for empowered, independent career superwomen, believe it or not. Men fundamentally learn this, usually the hard way, quite early in life. So ladies, it's time to woman up and learn, and more importantly, to teach the younger women and girls this as well. Sitting in a therapy circle jerk, all agreeing that it's men's fault for you being childless at 50, isn't going to help anyone. But using your group to teach young women about the end result of certain choices in life may actually help someone. There have always been career women, and there will always be career women. Even Saudi Arabia has them, so nobody is making the case that career women should be banned or eradicated or whatnot. But I am making the case that not only you cannot have it all, just like men cannot have it all, but that you must also internalize and spread that message to others as well. Quasi-mandatory sexual liberation is an idea that belongs in the same trash bin with other ideas such as alcohol prohibition, also a feminist-inspired stupidity, mandatory sterilization as part of eugenic projects, also rabidly supported by feminists by the way, and of course, feminism itself. They were terribly stupid ideas that humans did try on several societies. With alcohol prohibition and eugenics, humans drew the proper conclusions based upon the consequences and the evidence in front of them. I say it's time to do the same with this whole liberation nonsense. And given the toxicity of the culture, it is absolutely up to women to do the heavy lifting on this and first stop being part of the problem, namely women that pressure other women into giving in to the sexual liberation nonsense, and secondly, to start actively promote not liberation, but the responsibility that comes with the already existing freedom. Women are not oppressed. To suggest otherwise is to simply lie. So women don't need to be liberated, they just need to understand that freedom is a sum of trade-offs, i.e., there is no free lunch. And with that being said, oh boy, this came out longer than I wanted. C'est la vie. Anyway, I'll see you around on Freedom Alternative.